250 crore 250 crore rupees. It's the number in every DPDP conference deck, every consultant's opening slide, every worried WhatsApp forward between CFOs, and in my experience, 9 out of 10 people quoting it can't answer three basic questions. What conduct does it actually attach to? What are the other numbers in the schedule? And what must the board weigh before writing any figure at all? Today, we answer all three because fear of a number is not a compliance strategy, but understanding a penalty architecture absolutely is. And buried in that architecture is the most practical sentence in this entire law. The things that reduce your penalty are all things you can start building this week. You're listening to DPDP Daily. I'm Harmeet Singh Kapoor. I've spent my career running large programs and portfolios, the discipline of making complex things actually happen. And for the past few years, I've brought that discipline to India's data protection law. I wrote the DPDP Act Compliance Handbook from law to ground reality, and this show is that book, opened up one episode at a time. If you're new here, the 30-second background. In 2023, India passed its first comprehensive data protection law, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. In November 2025, the government notified the rules that make it operational on a phased clock that runs to full enforcement in May 2027. Together, they decide what every company, hospital, school, app, and shopkeeper in this country may do with your personal data and what you can demand when they get it wrong. 15 minutes a day, no jargon, real answers. Let's get into it. Start with the schedule itself. The Act carries a table of maximum penalties, each tied to a specific failure, and the tiers tell you exactly what Parliament feared most. At the top, the famous figure up to 250 crore rupees for failing to take reasonable security safeguards to prevent a personal data breach. Note the precision we flagged back in our very first week. The penalty attaches to the failure of safeguards, not to the fact of a breach. Parliament put the biggest number on prevention because prevention is where boards underinvest. The second tier, up to 200 crore, covers two failures: breach obligations, failing to notify the board or affected individuals as required, and children's data, breaching the obligations around verifiable parental consent, tracking, and targeted advertising. Read the signal, telling on yourself when things go wrong and protecting minors sit just below security itself in the hierarchy of what the state cares about. Third tier, up to 150 crore for a significant data fiduciary failing its additional obligations, the DPO, the impact assessments, the audits. If the government promotes you to SDF and you treat the designation as a press release, this is the tier waiting. Then the general tier, up to 50 crore for breaching any other provision of the Act or its rules. The catch-all that makes every obligation real, from notice defects to ignoring rights requests. And at the very bottom, the tier that surprises people, up to 10,000 rupees for a data principal breaching her duties. The frivolous complaint provision we discussed in the roles episode. 10,000 versus 250 crore. The asymmetry itself is a statement about where power lies and where accountability is priced. Two structural points before the calculation machinery. These are maximums per instance, ceilings not fixed fines. The board operates a range, and everything below decides where in the range you land. And there is no compensation channel here. Penalties flow to the state, not to affected individuals, one of the deliberate design choices from our legislative journey episode. A citizen's remedy is the complaint and the correction, not damages. Now the part practitioners should memorize. The Act binds the board's discretion with mandatory factors it must consider when determining any penalty. Listen to them as a checklist, because each one is addressable in advance. The nature, gravity, and duration of the breach. The type and nature of the personal data affected, whether the breach is repetitive, whether the person realized a gain or avoided a loss because of the breach, whether the person took mitigating actions and how promptly, whether the penalty is proportionate and effective, and the likely impact of the penalty on the person. Run your eye back over that list and notice something remarkable. At least half the factors are within your control before anything ever goes wrong. Duration: organizations that detect and stop incidents fast score, differently from those who discover breaches from the newspapers. Detection capability is a penalty mitigation asset. Repetitiveness, fixing root causes after the first incident, is what separates an event from a pattern. Gain or avoided loss: the company that skipped security spending to save money hands the board an aggravating factor gift wrapped. And mitigation: prompt, documented response actions are explicitly on the scales. This is why I keep hammering the evidence file from our countdown episode. When the board weighs these factors, contemporaneous records are the only persuasive language. Your security investments, your drill reports, your incident timeline with timestamps, that file is literally the difference between the top of a range and the bottom of it. A moment of comparative context sharpens the design. Europe's GDPR famously pegs its ceilings to turnover, up to 4% of global annual revenue, making the maximum scale automatically with the offender. India chose absolute caps instead. 250 crore is 250 crore whether you're a global giant or a mid-cap. Both designs have consequences worth understanding. For the largest multinationals, India's ceiling is proportionally gentler than 4% of global turnover would be, a deliberate signal of a business-friendly regime. For a mid-sized Indian company, though, the same absolute number can be existential, which is precisely why the mandatory factors, proportionality, and impact on the person, carry the weight of scaling that Europe builds into the ceiling itself. And note, per instance, a failure pattern spanning multiple breaches or obligations can stack, so the practical exposure of sustained neglect exceeds any single headline figure. The architecture rewards exactly one strategy: not gaming the ceiling, but working the factors. Then there's the exit ramp the schedule never advertises: voluntary undertakings. At any stage of a proceeding, the board may accept an undertaking, commitments to take or refrain from specified actions, possibly with conditions, and acceptance bars, further proceedings on that matter. It's the settlement valve, borrowed from securities regulation, and it will matter enormously in the first enforcement years. A regulator building credibility typically prefers visible remediation to decade-long litigation. The organizations positioned to use it will be those who can walk in with a credible remediation plan and a record of good faith, which is, again, the evidence file wearing a different hat. Let me also puncture the two bad reactions the 250 crore rupees number produces. Reaction 1, paralysis, one breach and we're finished. No, the schedule is a range architecture with mandatory proportionality, and the impact on the person factor exists precisely so. Penalties fit the entity. A proportionate regulator fining a small firm is not writing headlines grade numbers. Reaction 2, cynicism. They'll never actually impose big penalties. Perhaps not in month 1, but the ceiling exists. The first landmark penalty is a matter of when, and no rational board bets the balance sheet on regulatory shyness. The rational posture sits between the reactions: respect the ceiling, work the factors. So, here's this episode's homework, and it's genuinely a 1 hour exercise. Take the penalty schedule and map your organization against each tier. What's our security safeguards story, and where's its evidence? Could we execute the breach notifications on the clocks? Do we touch children's data anywhere? Are we plausibly SDF material? For each tier, one honest sentence about exposure and one about existing evidence. That single page is the risk conversation your leadership actually needs, far more useful than the number on the conference slide. Tomorrow, the institution that wields all of this the Data Protection Board itself, how a digital-first regulator actually works, what powers it holds, how a complaint travels, and why its design will produce more enforcement than skeptics expect. That's today's episode of DPDP Daily. If it made this law a little clearer, do one thing for me. Send it to one person who needs it. That's how this show grows. Everything I covered today, with the templates, checklists, and audit frameworks behind it, is in my book, The DPDP Act Compliance Handbook, From Law to Ground Reality. And I post one practical DPDP insight every morning. Find me on LinkedIn and on X and Facebook as well, under Harmeet S. Kapoor. One important note: this is education, not legal advice. For decisions about your organization or your rights, take proper professional advice on your specific facts. New episode every day. I'll see you tomorrow.